What would you do if the person you married didn't speak a word to you? Not on your wedding day, not even the night after? If you're already leaning in, if you're already wondering, go ahead and tap like. You're in the right place. And if you love stories that unfold slowly, quietly, but stay with you long after, subscribe. There's more where this came from. I got married on a Thursday. The church smelled faintly of cedar wood and aging marble. Clean, solemn, cold. Sunlight slanted through the stained glass windows like forgotten prayers, painting pale color on white stone. I stood in front of the altar in a dress I didn't choose, about to vow myself to a man I didn't know. Not one person smiled. There was no music, no bridesmaids, no bouquet. Just a contract cloaked in lace. My hands were still. My voice, when asked to repeat the vows, was clear. You learn that silence becomes easier when you've lived around it long enough. Damien Alcott, the man standing next to me, did not look at me once. He stood tall, his frame tailored in gray wool, his jawline so sharp it could cut. His dark eyes stared straight ahead, unmoved by the priest's words or my presence beside him. If anyone had walked into the chapel without context, they might have thought we were business partners, about to sign a merger, not husband and wife. But then, maybe that's exactly what we were. My mother used to say, a woman's wedding day should feel like stepping into light. And this felt more like walking off a cliff. It had been 8 months since she passed. My father, lost in grief and debt, had agreed to the arrangement in a quiet conversation over bourbon and legal documents. Marry Damien Alcott, and the family would stay afloat. That was the deal, and I was the offering. I didn't fight it, not because I wanted this, but because I couldn't bear to lose anyone else. I signed the papers the same day I found out my mother's cancer had spread. I never told her. She died thinking I'd find love on my own terms. I let her believe that. That night, after the ceremony, Damien and I returned to his penthouse on the Upper West Side. The place was all stone and glass. Clean lines, high ceilings, walls that didn't echo because there was no one to talk to. He showed me the guest room. Not my room. Not ours. Just a room. I have early meetings, he said. We won't get in each other's way. Then he walked away. I stood in the doorway for a long time, still in my dress. The satin clung to my legs. My hair was pinned, but one curl had fallen across my cheek. I left it there. Through the tall windows, the city shimmered in silence. Headlights blinked far below, like tiny lives I couldn't reach. I don't know what drew me to the old suitcase I had packed from home, but as I opened it, the scent of lavender and cedar rose faintly, the scent of my mother's closet. I reached in and found it tucked between a sweater and a scarf, a small dented silver tin of tea. It used to sit on the windowsill of our kitchen back home. Every night, after dinner, Mom would boil water and sing softly while the steam fogged the glass. You are my sunshine. My only sunshine. I hadn't heard that song in months. I unscrewed the lid. Inside, nestled beneath a folded note, were a few dry tea leaves and the faintest trace of her perfume. My breath caught. I unfolded the paper with careful fingers. Her handwriting, slanted and familiar, spilled across the page in black ink, faded just enough to feel like it belonged to a different time. If you must marry, my darling, then marry with your eyes open. Sometimes the deepest kindness comes from a stranger. But never lose yourself just to be kept. Not even for love. I read it twice. Then again. And for the first time that day, no, that year, my hands began to shake. I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. I folded the note back into its tin and placed it on the windowsill of the guest room. The tea leaves inside didn't smell like much anymore, but something about having it near felt like a tether. Like maybe, If I held very still, I could still hear her voice from the kitchen, singing, brewing tea, being alive. I sat down, still, in the dress, and let the city lights flicker across my skin. Outside, New York was buzzing, radiant, fast. But inside that glass tower, I felt suspended, like a museum piece in a locked display. No one looked closely. No one cared if the light was on. And somewhere down the hall, the man I had just married was already asleep, or pretending to be. That night, I dreamt of home. Not the grand marble entryway I had just entered into, but the creaky old kitchen with the uneven floor, the humming fridge, and the warmth of my mother's hands on my hair. When I woke, the light was pale, and the apartment was silent, but the tea tin was still on the sill, and my mother's words still echoed. Sometimes the deepest kindness comes from a stranger. I looked toward the closed door that led to Damien's room. He hadn't spoken to me since the church, hadn't touched me, hadn't offered so, much as a welcome. And yet, there was something in the way he hadn't forced a performance, hadn't pretended to be a husband, that almost, oddly, felt like respect. I wasn't sure. But I would find out, because as of that morning, I was no longer just a daughter or a bride. I was a woman in a glass tower, holding a letter from her mother, and married to a stranger with a locked heart, and whether or not he knew it, I had begun to look for the key. They say a house can reflect its owner. If that's true, Damien Alcott's home wasn't a place at all. It was a fortress, of glass, steel, and silence. The morning after the wedding, I woke in the guest bedroom to pale light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows. The walls were bare, the linens crisp, the air cold enough to make you forget. You were supposed to belong. There were no photos, no flowers, no trace of life beyond what was absolutely necessary. Only the faintest scent of cedarwood and leather, like an old study no one reads in anymore. I padded barefoot into the kitchen. It was all polished stone and chrome. A single cup of coffee was already waiting on the marble counter. No note, no sound of footsteps. Just that cup, steaming softly like a question. He was gone. Of course he was. I took the coffee out onto the small terrace overlooking the city. Below, New York pulsed with movement. Yellow cabs darting between traffic lights, lives unfolding, behind windows I couldn't see into. And above it all, I stood there, barefoot in a borrowed robe, feeling like a shadow. I hadn't called my father. I hadn't checked on my mother. I hadn't spoken a word to my husband since we exchanged vows in that cold church. And strangely, I didn't miss the silence. It had followed me here. Later that day, I unpacked what little I brought from home. Most of my things had been sold to pay for medical care. I had kept only what mattered. A couple of sweaters, a photograph of my parents holding me as a baby, and a worn paperback I'd read 100 times. I tucked them into the built-in shelves, beside the window, trying to make the space feel less sterile. But it resisted me, like Damien himself. Controlled, efficient, untouched. That evening, the phone rang. It was the nurse from home. Her voice was careful, professional. Your mother's responding well to the new medication. Also, the treatment costs have been fully covered, paid in advance, anonymously. My breath caught. I hadn't said a word to Damien about my mother's care. I hadn't dared to. He had made no promises, offered no kindness, and yet. I waited in the living room, unsure of what to say, or whether I should say anything at all. When Damien finally walked in around 7 p.m., he looked exactly as he had at the altar, tailored, unreadable, untouchable. I stood. He paused only slightly at the sight of me, then continued toward the hallway, loosening his tie. I opened my mouth, closed it again, and then, quietly, without looking at him, "Thank you." For my mother. He stopped mid-step. His voice was even, but quieter than usual. I don't need gratitude. I've just watched someone I loved slip away. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And with that, he disappeared down the hall. No dramatic music. No teary confession. Just a man disappearing into his own shadows, and a woman holding her breath in a room that still didn't feel like hers. That night, I sat with my tea tin again. This time, I didn't cry. I just held it in my palm like a talisman, like if I held on tightly enough. I could borrow my mother's steadiness for a while longer. She would have liked the terrace. She would have found the quiet peaceful. She would have smiled, even in this strange house, and said something like, kindness is often buried under too many layers, but it doesn't mean it's not there. Before I went to bed, I did something I hadn't planned to. I took one of the silver teacups from the tin, delicate, floral-edged, slightly chipped on one side, and washed it carefully. Then I placed it on the marble counter, next to the cup of coffee Damien always left. Just that. Nothing more. The next morning, the teacup was gone. But beside my breakfast plate, quiet and unannounced, was a folded napkin. Inside it, a single cinnamon stick, the kind my mother used to boil with her tea. There's a sound in hospitals I've never grown used to. It isn't the beeping monitors, or the distant footsteps. It's the quiet hum of trying to stay alive. It wraps around every hallway, every breath, like the walls themselves are holding their breath with you. That morning, I sat by my mother's bedside holding her hand. She was asleep, her chest rising in slow, measured intervals. The light through the blinds painted soft bars across her face. I hadn't told her I got married. I didn't have to. Mothers know these things, especially when they don't want to ask. I poured tea into a paper cup and opened the old tin I always brought from the city. Just holding it made me feel closer to her. Safer. Then, for the first time, I noticed something else inside. Beneath the folded napkin were the cinnamon. Stick had once rested. A second letter, tucked into the bottom of the tin, written on aged stationery. My mother's handwriting, elegant and firm, the kind she only used when something mattered. Elena, my love, if you've found this, I didn't have time to explain everything, so I'll say it here, simply and honestly. Your father did what he thought would save us, but in doing so, he tied you to a promise you didn't make, to a man you didn't choose. Damien Alcott is not a mistake, but he is a consequence, one we all must learn to live with, or change. Be kind, but not blind. Be strong, but not hard. And if ever you find in him something worth loving, don't run from it just because it didn't start the way it should. I sat there for a long time, just holding the paper. The world outside kept turning. Machines kept humming. But inside me, something shifted. Later that afternoon, I returned to the penthouse and found Damien in the kitchen, not dressed for work for once. He stood at the stove, a kettle hissing behind him, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His shirt was a pale gray, and for the first time, he looked less like a CEO and more like someone I might have met in a quieter life. He didn't look up. I didn't expect you back today. I needed to clear my head. He nodded, saying nothing more. But I didn't leave the room. Instead, I pulled the letter from my coat pocket and laid it gently on the counter between us. He paused, then read. His brow didn't furrow. His jaw didn't tighten. He just stood still. And when he finally looked up, his eyes weren't cold. They were tired. I knew she'd written something. She asked me to give it to you myself. I didn't. Why? Because I didn't think you'd want to hear anything from me. Silence. Then softly, you were right. I meant it. But I didn't want it to stay that way. Damien sat down, one hand resting on the table, the other still holding the edge of the letter. He didn't look at me when he said it. Maybe that's why it felt honest. Your father once saved mine from public ruin. A decade ago. One phone call from him, and my family name was cleared. No questions asked. This marriage wasn't a repayment. It was a way to stop your family from being destroyed the same way mine almost was. You didn't owe me, I whispered. No, but I owed him, and I didn't know another way. I didn't expect the tears. Not from him, not from me. But somehow, they were there. His voice dropped, almost inaudible. I thought if I kept it cold, it would be easier. For both of us. I sat down across from him. Not close, but closer than before. I don't know who you are yet, Damien, but I think maybe neither do you. He didn't answer, but the kettle whistled behind us, and this time, he didn't let it boil over. That evening, he made us tea. He didn't ask how I liked it. He just placed a mug beside me, and I didn't ask what was in it. We sat in the living room, two people not quite strangers, not yet anything else, watching the lights of the city blink to life one by one. And in that quiet, with the warmth of the cup in my hand and the second letter resting in my lap, I realized something simple but true. You can't always choose how something begins, but you can choose what to do once it has. Some nights feel longer than others, not because of what happens, but because of what doesn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. The tea was still warm in my hands, but my thoughts were colder, turning over the letter again and again. I kept hearing my mother's voice. Be kind, but not blind. Be strong, but not hard. The kind of words you don't understand until you're standing in the silence they leave behind. The fireplace in Damien's penthouse hadn't been lit since I moved in. It sat like a relic, beautiful but unused, like everything else in that glass and stone fortress. I found a blanket, wrapped it around my shoulders, and sat in front of the hearth anyway. No flames, no fire. Just me, curled up in a room that didn't belong to me, beside a hearth that hadn't been asked to warm anyone in a long time. I didn't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the tea to go cold. Long enough for the city to dim. And then I heard it. Soft, distant, almost unreal. Piano. 3 slow notes. Then a pause. Then more. Gentle. Unsure. Like someone feeling their way through a memory. I stood. The sound was coming from the room at the far end of the hall. One I had never entered. I followed it barefoot, the floor cool beneath me. The door was open just enough. Inside, a grand piano, black and polished, glowing faintly in the lamplight. And Damien. He was sitting alone, fingers moving slowly across the keys. He didn't look up, but I knew the song. I would know it anywhere. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. He played it simply, tenderly. Not well, but not without feeling. I stayed in the doorway. Tears stung my eyes, not because the melody was perfect. It wasn't. But because he played it like someone who had listened to it, more than once, and had tried to remember the sound just for me. How did you know? I whispered. He stopped. The final note hung in the air, trembling. You hummed it, the first night here, in your sleep. He turned to me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. It sounded like something that mattered. I stepped into the room slowly, one hand still holding the edge of the blanket It was her lullaby. Your mother's? I nodded. He slid over on the piano bench. Not far. Just enough. I don't play. Not really. You do now. We sat in silence for a while, and then, gently, I placed my fingers on the keys beside his. Our hands didn't touch, but they were close. You missed a note in the second line. I probably missed several. I smiled. Barely. It still sounded like her. He didn't ask about her, and I didn't offer. But when I closed my eyes, I could picture my mother again, standing in the kitchen, humming as she stirred soup, the smell of cinnamon and rosemary in the air. I used to think that memory was mine, alone. Now, I had shared it. After a while, he walked me back to the living room. We didn't say anything. There wasn't anything left to say. But just before I turned toward the guest room, he stopped me. Elena. His voice wasn't cold. It wasn't distant. It was unsure. And something in that made me stop. I don't know how to be what you probably deserve. I wasn't raised for softness or gentleness. Neither was I said quietly. He looked at me for a long time. Not like before, not appraising or guarded. Just looking, like he was trying to memorize something. I never planned to marry. Not again. But when I saw you, not at the church, before that, months ago, I thought, if I ever did, it would be someone who could sit in silence and still feel like home. I didn't answer. I couldn't. But as I turned to go, I reached out and did something I hadn't done since the day we met. I touched his hand, just a brush. Barely there. But it was enough. He didn't pull away. That night, as I crawled back into bed, the room felt a little less cold. The city still hummed beyond the glass. But in the corner of the apartment, a fire I hadn't lit burned faintly in the piano room, and I knew something had changed. Not everything. Not yet. But something. There's a particular kind of silence that follows something almost tender. It isn't peace. Not quite. It's the kind that lingers just long enough to make you wonder if what you felt was real at all. The night Damien played my mother's lullaby, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the hush of the city pressing against the glass walls. My hand still tingled where it had touched his. He hadn't said it. Neither had I. But something passed between us, and the next morning I couldn't find him. Just a note on the kitchen counter. Meetings in Boston. Back Thursday. Take care. No name. No warmth. Just like that. Gone again. I tried to stay. I really did. But the apartment felt emptier now, after the piano, after that moment. Like it had opened something, only to seal it again before I could understand it. By the third day, the rooms felt too big. The quiet too loud. So I packed a bag, left a short note, and called a cab to take me out of the city. I went north, to the old cabin my parents used to rent every winter when I was a child. After Mom died, Dad had kept the keys, but no one had. Been back in years. The place was tucked between tall pines and quiet snowdrifts. Wooden walls, stone fireplace, windows that fogged up when you boiled water. It wasn't warm at first. But it was real, and it didn't expect anything of me. I lit the fire myself, piled on blankets, opened the windows just wide enough to hear the wind moving through the trees. The loneliness here felt different. It didn't weigh the same as it did in the penthouse. There I was an accessory, something unused, beautiful maybe, but meaningless. Here I was simply alone. But mine, and I needed that, even if it hurt. 3 days passed. I walked in the snow. Wrote in the old journal I used to keep. Tried not to wonder if he'd noticed I was gone, It was early evening when I heard the knock. Not urgent, not angry, just steady. I stood at the door for a long moment before opening it. And there he was. Damien, his coat dusted with snow, eyes red from the cold, a bag in one hand, and in the other, the silver tea tin. I blinked. "You left it," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd come." He didn't answer, just stepped inside slowly, like the air might crack if he moved too quickly. He placed the tin on the kitchen table. I lit the kettle without speaking. The air between us was full of things neither of us had words for. He sat, near the fire, watching the flames. And when I finally brought him the tea, he didn't reach for it immediately. Just looked at me, long and slow. "I didn't leave to punish you," I said softly. "I know. I left because being near you was starting to feel like something I wanted, and I wasn't sure if you'd ever want it back." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to want it, not without destroying it." We sat in silence again. But it wasn't sharp this time. It wrapped around us like the wool blanket draped over the back of the old couch. The fire popped gently. The wind howled outside, but not loud enough to disturb. Then Damien reached into his coat pocket. "There's something else." He pulled out a letter, worn, folded, edges softened with time. "Your mother gave this to me, the day we signed the marriage contract." I stared. "She made me promise I'd give it to you, only if I ever understood what she meant when she said love is a form of return." He held it out, not meeting my eyes. "I think I do." Now, I didn't open it. Not yet. Some letters deserve to be read in stillness, in safety. But I took it from his hand, and he didn't let go right away. His fingers brushed mine. This time, he trembled. Only slightly. But enough. That night I made soup. He found extra wood for the fire. We didn't touch. Didn't kiss. Didn't ask for anything. But we shared the couch, sitting side by side, knees close enough to feel the heat of each other without breaking the peace between us. And I realized something I hadn't known how to name before. Sometimes love begins not in passion, but in return. In showing up. In the long, quiet walk through the snow, just to bring someone back their tea tin. Before bed, I lit a candle and sat by the window. The stars were sharp in the sky. The trees swayed gently. And for the first time, in a long while I felt steady, not fixed, not certain, but no longer lost. In the next room, I heard Damien moving. Not pacing, not restless, just there. And that, for now, was enough. I didn't open the letter right away. I kept it tucked inside the pocket of my coat for nearly 24 hours, folding and unfolding the flap like it might somehow answer its own questions if I just touched it enough. But letters don't speak for themselves. They wait for the right moment, for the right stillness. It was just after dawn when I finally read it. Damien was still asleep in the guest room. The fire had burned low. The cabin was hushed, except for the whistle of wind pushing softly at the windows. I sat at the little wooden table near the stove, tea in one hand, the letter in the other. My hands didn't shake. Not this time. The paper smelled like her perfume. Subtle, old, and strangely alive. I unfolded it slowly. "My sweet girl, if this letter finds you, then I've already stepped away from your life in the way only mothers can too soon. I imagine you are alone, or you feel like you are. But you're not. I knew when I looked at Damien Alcott that he had edges you would bleed on. But I also saw something else. A man who never had the softness you carry so easily. A man who might learn gentleness, if someone offered it without asking for it back. I know you didn't choose this marriage, but maybe in time, it will become something you do choose. You have always been braver than you know, and kinder than most people deserve. Don't let the silence between you grow so thick that it buries what could have been spoken. Love him if you can. And forgive him when he doesn't know how to say thank you. He is learning. So are you. Mom, when I finished reading, I didn't cry. I closed the letter and pressed it to my chest. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. It felt like closure, and something new, all at once. Damien found me an hour later, still at the table, still in my robe, hands wrapped around a now cold cup of tea. He paused in the doorway. No tie. No jacket, just a sweater and the quiet expression of someone who had slept, but not rested. You read it, he said gently. I nodded. He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table. I wasn't sure what she'd written. She wrote, about you. He flinched. Just a little. She said, you might bleed me at first, but you could learn gentleness. He looked down. Then quietly, I don't want to hurt you. Then don't. A pause. But don't pretend you don't. Feel anything just because it's safer. The room held its breath with us. The wind outside pressed against the window panes. Then he spoke. Not loudly, not bravely, but honestly. I was married before. That stopped me. He kept his eyes on his hands. It wasn't good. We were young. I thought I could buy her loyalty with power. But all I bought was silence, and eventually, someone else's affection. He looked up then. When I met you, I promised myself I wouldn't try again, that I would keep everything contained. And yet, I said softly, you showed up with a tea tin in the snow. A small, almost broken smile ghosted across his mouth. I didn't know what else to do. I reached across the table, slowly, and took his hand. No dramatic gesture, just skin against skin. Steady, quiet. You're trying, I said, and I see that. He closed his eyes briefly, then whispered, I need you to know something. Tell me. I don't sleep well when you're not in the apartment. A pause. He opened his eyes again. It's too quiet. I laughed gently. Not mockingly, just soft enough to let the tension release. Funny. I came here because it was quiet. He looked at me like I'd said something he hadn't allowed himself to think. I thought you left because you regretted it. I left because I wanted to know if I could miss you. I exhaled slowly. And I did. We sat like that, hands still folded, the fire beginning to catch again. There was no confession of love. No promises. Just truth, spoken softly. Later, he walked me through the woods behind the cabin. The snow had crusted overnight, thin and crisp. Branches were heavy with frost, but the sunlight slipped through like something holy. We didn't talk much, but every now and then he'd glance at me, like he was still surprised I was walking beside him. And I'd glance back, like I still didn't know if I should be, but we kept walking. Because sometimes love isn't a declaration. Sometimes it's the choice to stay on the path, even when you don't know where it leads. That night, I sat by the fireplace, rereading my mother's letter. Damien came in with a blanket and a cup of tea. Cinnamon, no sugar. He handed it to me wordlessly, then sat across the room, book in hand. We didn't touch, didn't speak. But we were in the same room, and neither of us looked away. We stayed in the cabin longer than planned. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because for the first time nothing did. And that was enough. There was wood to chop, soup to heat, blankets to fold. We slipped into a rhythm that wasn't spoken aloud, but understood all the same. Two people moving gently around one another, as if trying not to disturb the very peace they'd been starved for. Every morning, Damien would make the coffee. Strong and dark, no sugar. I'd boil water for my tea, slice apples, and toast the bread. We didn't ask who would do what. It just happened. And every now and then, I'd catch him watching me like it surprised him to see me still there. "You know," I said one morning as he dried dishes beside me, "you look a little less CEO when your sleeves are rolled up." He smirked. "And you look a little more dangerous when you hum while slicing things." We both laughed, a real laugh, unforced, quiet, but real. The snow began to melt in the second week, and the days stretched a little longer. In the afternoons, we'd take walks. Slow, deliberate. He always walked a half step behind me like he was letting me lead, even when we didn't know where we were going. One afternoon, as we reached the edge of the trail, he pointed to a fallen tree nearby. "That used to be a maple, didn't it?" "How would you know?" "I don't. I'm just guessing." "Sounds about right for how we started," I smiled. He paused, then added, "But we're still standing." That night I found something new on the kitchen counter, a book of poems, simple, soft-spoken, the kind of verses my mother used to read aloud on winter mornings. I opened it and saw a note in the front. "For the quieter parts of you." It wasn't signed, but I knew who had placed it there. And that night, I placed my old scarf, faded and lavender-scented, on the back of his chair. He wore it the next day without saying a word. Little things began to build, unnoticed until you stopped to feel them. The way he'd refill my tea without asking. The way I'd leave the porch light on if he stepped outside. The way our silences grew softer. I stopped checking my phone. Stopped thinking of the apartment in the city like something I needed to escape. Because this, whatever it was, felt closer to home than anything else had in a long time. One evening I caught him outside, near the old shed behind the cabin. He was working with wood, quietly focused, sleeves rolled up again, sawdust in his hair. "What are you doing?" I asked from the doorway. He turned, blinking like I'd pulled him out of a dream. "Making something." "What kind of something?" He shrugged. "You'll see." It took him 3 days. He worked in the mornings while I read beside the fire, then helped him sand pieces in the afternoon, though he never let me carry anything heavy. And finally, on the 4th day, he brought it inside. A bookshelf. Sturdy. Clean lines, made from old pine boards he found in the shed. Simple, but beautiful. "My mom always wanted one like this," I said, running my fingers across the wood. "She never got it. Dad always said she read too much already." Then, "This one's hers," he said, setting it beside the fireplace. "She's not here." He looked at me. "You are." We placed the poetry book there first, then my journal, his weathered paperback from law school, the tin of tea leaves. It was a small thing, a shelf, just wood and nails, but it felt like a cornerstone. That night, I made dinner, nothing fancy, pasta, bread, a bit of wine. He lit candles, not for show. Just because it was getting dark early and the fireplace was still catching. We sat at the table like we had a dozen times already, but this time it felt different, like it wasn't pretending anymore. After the dishes were done, I brought out the deck of cards tucked in the back of the drawer. "Do you know how to play rummy?" I asked. "I know how to lose at it." "Good. I hate sore winners." We played until the fire was low. He lost. Gracefully. Mostly. Before bed, I stood at the bookshelf one last time, running my fingers over the spines. I didn't need to read anything. I just wanted to remember the shape of what we were building. Quietly, gently, day by day. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something, and for now that was more than enough. I woke early on the last morning. The cabin was still. Snow had started to fall again. Soft, gentle flurries that clung to the window panes like breath. The kind of snow that doesn't ask for attention. It simply arrives. Quietly. Like love, if you let it. Damien was still sleeping in the next room. He'd fallen asleep in the chair by the fire again. Book resting on his chest, a blanket around his shoulders. We hadn't gone back to the city yet. Neither of us had brought it up. And somehow, in the stillness, that silence felt like agreement. I brewed tea. Cinnamon. No sugar. Then I sat at the small table near the window with a blank sheet of paper and my mother's fountain pen. And I began to write. Dear Mom, I wish you could see it now. The snow, the fire, the tea tin by the window, the bookshelf beside the hearth, full of poems you would have underlined with soft pencil marks. It's quiet here, but not lonely. I brought your scarf. I wear it on the porch in the mornings, even though it smells less like you now and more like pine. I don't mind. It feels like both of us. Damien made the shelf. He didn't say it, but I know he carved your initials into the back. I ran my fingers over them last night. I didn't cry. I smiled. He still doesn't speak much. Still forgets to soften his tone when he's tired. Still thinks making tea counts as an apology. But I think you were right. Somewhere beneath all that steel, he's learning. And so am I. The paper grew, warm under my hand. I paused, sipping tea. The clock ticked softly in the corner. Outside, a bird hopped across the porch rail, fluffed up against the cold, but alive. He doesn't call me darling or write love notes, but he remembers the way I take my tea. He keeps the porch light on if I walk outside after dinner. He hands me books with pages dog-eared just so I'll read the parts that made him stop. He stays. That matters. We're going back to the city soon. The apartment still feels too tall, too clean. But maybe it won't feel so empty now. We'll bring the bookshelf, and maybe the deck of cards, and maybe, if he asks me again to stay, this time, I'll say yes out loud. But for now, I just wanted you to know. I think I've stopped searching for home, because I found him, and I stayed. With love, Elena. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the tea tin, beneath the cinnamon sticks. Not because I needed to hide it, but because some things deserve to live in warm places. By the time Damien woke, the snow had started to fade into light. He found me by the fire, feet tucked beneath me, reading. He didn't say, "Good morning." He just sat down beside me, shoulder brushing mine. And then, quietly, "When we get back, I want to fix the place up a little." I glanced over. "The apartment?" He nodded. "Add a reading nook. Somewhere you can look out the window with your tea." "You planning on drinking tea too?" "No. I just want to sit beside you while you do." I didn't answer. Instead, I leaned my head lightly against his shoulder. And after a moment, I felt him shift. His arm moved, slow and certain, around my back, not possessive, not fearful. Just there, like something earned, like something kept. Outside, the last snowflake landed on the porch rail and melted. Inside, the fire warmed the edge of our quiet morning. No vows, no need. Because the ones that matter most aren't always spoken in church. Sometimes they're whispered beside fireplaces, under scarves that smell like pine. Sometimes they're in bookshelves built by hand. Sometimes they're in teacups washed without asking. And sometimes they're in the man who sits beside you and doesn't look away. If something in this story made you pause, breathe a little deeper, or simply feel less alone, go ahead and leave a like. It helps more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, quiet, human, honest, hit subscribe. I'll be right here, waiting to share the next one with you.